You're watching Dark Ascent. Today, I'll cover the egoistic climbers who thought they could conquer the world's highest peak on gym fitness alone. From a powerlifter who treated the death zone like one more set he could grind through, to an overconfident man who climbed Everest in his gym clothes, thinking his body wouldn't even be affected at all. This is what happens when you treat the highest mountain on Earth like a workout. It was the 23rd of May, 2019, and somewhere above the balcony on the southeast ridge of Everest, in a line of climbers that had not moved in nearly an hour, a powerfully built man in a thin layer, better suited to a heated gym, was beginning to understand, far too late, that the strongest body in the world means nothing in air this thin. His name was Dorian Vex Howerin, and at sea level, he was, by any normal measure, an impressive specimen. He was 34, built like a man who had spent a decade under a barbell, and that strength had curdled into a belief that there was no challenge on Earth he could not overpower. Everest, to him, was not a mountain, so much as the ultimate workout. He had done a little hiking and almost no real mountaineering, and decided it did not matter, because he was fitter than the soft people who usually died up there. The mountain does not check how much you can lift. It checks how your body handles a third of the oxygen it was built for, and that is a test no gym can prepare you for. He had built a following online before the climb, all of it the same bright, confident note. He posted his training, the heavy lifts and long runs, captions about how this was what peak conditioning was for, and told everyone that the people who died on Everest were weak and unfit, and that he was none of those things. He posted a photo from base camp flexing with the icefall behind him, calling himself the strongest man on the mountain, and thousands cheered him on from their phones, none able to see the one number that mattered, which was how little air there would be where he was going. From the first rotations through the Khumbu icefall, the men who knew the mountain saw it in him. He climbed too fast and too hard, treating acclimatization as a thing for lesser men. His guide, an experienced Sherpa, tried to rein him in, to explain that the body needs weeks to adjust to this altitude, and that no amount of muscle changes that. Dorian heard it as an insult. He had never been the one told to hold back, and he could not absorb that the rules here had nothing to do with the ones he had spent his life mastering. He powered up to each camp ahead of schedule, and then lay awake gasping, his huge frame demanding more oxygen than the thin air could give it. And still he told himself it was working. When a Sherpa with a dozen summits tells me to slow down, I would listen immediately. But this guy heard it as a challenge to his pride, and I think that was the exact moment he lost. His messages home stayed defiant, even as his body started to fail. He wrote that the altitude was nothing, that the guides were too cautious, that he felt strong, that he would summit and prove every doubter wrong. He did not write about the headaches that would not quit, or the nights he could not breathe, or the way food had started to turn his stomach. The story he was selling and the body he was actually in had begun to drift apart, and only one of them was going to make it onto the mountain on summit day. That season was the worst possible one for a man like him to make his mistakes. It was the year of the famous photograph, the long human traffic jam strung out along the summit ridge. Hundreds of climbers funneling into one short weather window and standing in line at 29,000 feet, with the clock running on their oxygen and their lives. For a careful, experienced climber, it was dangerous. For a man who had already burned himself ragged, proving he was the strongest one there, it was a death trap with a cue. On summit day, Dorian started up into that crowd already depleted, and the gridlock did the rest. He stood in the line above the balcony for hours, bottled oxygen draining, while he did nothing but wait, his body burning its last reserves to stay warm in a layer he had chosen because it looked good in photographs. By the time the way cleared, he had almost nothing left. He reached the summit late in the day, took his photograph, and began the descent that kills most people who die on Everest, the one that comes after the goal is met and the body has nothing left to give. He did not get far. Somewhere below the south summit, his strength, the one thing he had trusted his whole life, ran out all at once. He sat down in the snow the way exhausted climbers do, the way that looks like resting and is actually dying, and no amount of willpower could get the most powerful body on the mountain back onto its feet. His guide stayed with him as long as it was survivable, and then faced the terrible arithmetic of the death zone, where staying with one man who cannot move means 2 deaths instead of 1. The last message anyone got from his phone had gone out from high on the mountain, hours before. Still confident, still certain. He had written that he was almost there, that he had told everyone he would make it, that strength always wins in the end. It was the last thing he ever posted. Dorian Vex Howerin never came down off Everest. He died high on the southeast ridge, on the 23rd of May, 2019, one of the many that crowded season took, a man who arrived believing his body made him the exception, and learned in his final hours that the mountain had never once been impressed. They left him where he sat, because the death zone does not let the living carry the dead, and the strongest man on the mountain became one more landmark for the next year's climbers to pass. He spent his whole life making his body unbeatable, and I watched the mountain beat it without even trying. Up there, the air holds a third of what you need, and no muscle on earth can breathe for you. It was the 19th of May, 2012, and high on the upper slopes of Everest, a marathon runner who had never once quit a race was pushing past the turnaround time into a closing weather window, certain that the same heart that had carried him through 100 finish lines would carry him through this one too. The second man believed in a different number, and it killed him just as dead. Renzo Kalao was a marathoner, the kind of endurance athlete who had spent years chasing a better time and a lower resting heart rate, and he had arrived at Everest convinced that a strong engine was the whole secret. He had read that the mountain punished the unfit, and he had looked at his own remarkable heart and lungs and concluded that he, of all people, had nothing to fear. He was right that cardio matters. He was fatally wrong that it was enough. He had talked about it for months to anyone who would listen, and online to thousands. He posted his race times and training mileage, his heart rate graphs, the science of oxygen uptake he had half learned and fully trusted. He explained to his followers that climbing Everest was really an endurance event, that the people who died were simply not aerobically fit enough, and that his years of distance running had built him the perfect body for thin air. He was confident, likable, and completely wrong, and the comments were full of people telling him he had it all figured out. It was a crowded season with a narrow weather window, and it punished anyone who could not manage their own timing. Renzo Kalao climbed well at first, his endurance carrying him up through the lower camps, and that early ease was the worst thing that could have happened to him because it convinced him the mountain was exactly the test he had trained for. He stopped listening to the people telling him to watch the clock. He had run through walls his whole life, pushing past the point where his body begged him to stop, and that was the instinct that would not serve him here, because on Everest, the body that begs you to stop is usually right. His notes from the high camps still read like a race plan. He wrote about splits and pace and pushing through, about how the summit was just another finish line, and he had never failed to reach one. He wrote that he felt strong, that the others were too slow, that he would not let a crowd cost him his time. Nowhere in them was there any sense that this finish line sat in a place where the human body simply comes apart no matter how fit the heart driving it. On summit day, he made the classic killing error, the one his running brain was built to make. He refused to turn around. The window was closing and the crowd had slowed everyone to a crawl, and a sensible climber accepts that the summit will still be there next year. But Renzo Kalao had never quit a race with the finish in sight, and he treated the turnaround time as a suggestion for weaker runners. He pushed for the top long past the hour he should have turned, summited in deteriorating weather, and started down into exactly the cold and wind the turnaround rule exists to keep people out of. The turnaround time is the one rule I trust above all others up here, the hard line between the summit and the grave, and he treated it like just another personal best to beat. The descent destroyed him. The weather came in hard, the temperature crashed, and the wind found every gap in gear he had chosen for lightness rather than survival. His strong heart kept beating long after his hands and feet had frozen, and the cold had started shutting his thinking down, a cruelty that kept him moving and suffering past the point where a weaker man would have stopped. He grew confused, slow, clumsy, the early stages of a body freezing while its owner still believes he is fine. A Sherpa from his team found him stumbling and barely coherent and tried to do the impossible, to short rope a confused, half-frozen, fully grown man down technical ground in a rising storm. It is one of the most dangerous things a guide can attempt, and it bought Renzo Kalao a few more hours and cost the Sherpa everything, hauling that dead weight down, taking the man's falls onto his own body again and again. The Sherpa wrenched his back and shoulder so badly the damage never healed. He got his client lower, but not low enough, and not in time. The last anyone heard from Renzo Kalao directly was a voice message he had managed to send from near the summit, breathless and elated and certain, saying he had made it, that he had told them cardio was king, that he would see everyone at the bottom. He never made it to the bottom. Renzo Kalao died on the upper mountain on the 19th of May, 2012, of exposure and exhaustion on a descent he should never have been on. killed by the very refusal to quit that had made him a great runner. The Sherpa who tried to save him survived, but his climbing life was over. The back and shoulder he wrecked in the death zone never came right again, and a man who had made his living on the mountain could no longer carry a load up it. One athlete's certainty cost 2 careers, and only one was the dead man's. I think about that Sherpa more than the runner himself. He gave his own body to undo another man's arrogance, and he is the one left living every day with the cost of it. It was the 20th of May, 2013, and somewhere on the climb towards the high camp, a powerlifter built like a strongman was fighting for breath his enormous body could not get, refusing to turn back even as his lungs began to fill, because the one word that could save him was a word he had never once let himself say. The third man was the strongest of all of them, and that is exactly what killed him. Sava Branigan was a powerlifter, a competitor, a mountain of deliberate muscle who had spent 15 years making his body as big and as strong as it could possibly be. He came to Everest with the same logic the others had, that a body this powerful could handle anything, and he never understood that on a mountain, all that muscle is not an asset. It is a liability, because every extra pound of it is another pound screaming for oxygen that the air up high simply cannot provide. His feed was a wall of strength. Years of competitions, lifts, plates stacked on bars, captions about being unbreakable, and about how the weak fear the mountain and the strong own it. He had told his followers Everest was a test of toughness, and that he was the toughest man he knew. He posted a video flexing at base camp, his huge frame wrapped in gear, hard to find in his size, promising he would carry his own loads when the small men needed help. The comments loved it. None of them knew the very size they cheered was the thing that would drown him. It went wrong faster for him than the others, because the physics were against him from the start. While leaner climbers adapted, Sava's enormous body demanded so much oxygen that he was in trouble before he reached the upper camps. He developed early signs of altitude sickness, the headaches and breathlessness and the wet cough that warns of fluid filling the lungs. The only safe move was to go down, but going down was quitting, and Sava Branigan had built his entire identity on never quitting. This is the cruelest trick the mountain plays on strong men. The one move that saves them is the move their pride forbids, so the toughest die of a thing I would have walked away from. His last entries had a forced bravado to them, the sound of a man arguing with his own body. He wrote that it was just a chest cold, that he had trained through worse, that the weak would turn back and he would not. He wrote that pain was temporary and the summit was forever, the kind of gym slogan that means nothing to a pair of lungs slowly filling with fluid at altitude. He would not say the word that would have saved him, which was down. What he had was almost certainly the start of high-altitude pulmonary edema, the lungs flooding in the thin air, and it is one of the fastest killers on the mountain. The treatment is brutally simple, and it is not optional. You descend immediately, and you do not stop, because every foot of altitude you lose is air going back into your blood. There is no toughing it out. There is no pushing through. There is only down or dead, and a strong man's refusal to retreat is worth exactly nothing against the chemistry of it. He collapsed on the way up to the high camp, drowning slowly in his own lungs while his huge heart hammered uselessly at air that had nothing to give it. The team did everything they could, but a man his size cannot be carried down by exhausted climbers in the death zone, and no helicopter could reach him that high. His strength in the end was the final cruelty, keeping his body fighting long after a smaller man would have been gone. Sava Branigan died high on Everest on the 20th of May, 2013, of an altitude sickness that gives fair warning and asks only that you go down, killed by the one quality he was proudest of. The air does not care how much you can lift, and the body that needs the most oxygen is the first the thin air takes. If these stories are pulling you in, take 1 second to subscribe to Dark Ascent. It really keeps these deep dives coming. Now let's get right back to the mountain. It was the 27th of May, 2017, and near the top of the world, a fitness influencer was burning his last breath narrating to a camera instead of descending, chasing the triumphant summit shot his whole project depended on, while the safe hours slipped away behind him. The fourth man treated the deadliest mountain on earth as a backdrop, and it cost more than his own life. Emerson Puit was a fitness influencer and obstacle course racer who had built a brand on a certain grinning, sweaty toughness, and he came to Everest to make the piece of content that would change everything for him. He had the lean, capable look of a fit man and almost none of the things that keep a person alive on a high mountain. He had a camera, a plan for his shots, and a near total blindness to what he had walked into. Everything was framed for the audience. He posted constant updates from the trek in, all of it shot and captioned for maximum reach. The danger always mentioned and never quite respected. He talked about the summit as the money shot that would make the whole project go viral, and he pushed his small budget expedition to move on a schedule that served his footage rather than his safety. His followers watched a confident man having an adventure. The mountain saw a distracted one, taking risks he did not understand for reasons it could not care about. He skimped on the things that did not film well. He cut his acclimatization short because waiting made boring content. He spent summit day shooting and reshooting himself when he should have been moving, narrating to the camera in air too thin to spare the breath. And he pushed past a sensible turnaround, chasing the triumphant summit footage the whole project depended on, blind to the fact that the mountain charges the same price for a selfie as for anything else done too late and too high. A camera makes me brave in all the wrong places too, and he kept filming the danger instead of ever once respecting it. His captions on summit day, the ones that posted later from a device that had cached them, were pure performance. He wrote that he was making history, that the haters could watch him stand on top of the world, that this was the shot of a lifetime. The shot of a lifetime is a phrase that should come with a warning on a mountain like this, because the lifetime it refers to is sometimes very nearly over. He summited too late, spent on filming and thin on oxygen, and on the descent he began to fall apart in the way the death zone takes the careless. He grew slow and confused, and a young Sherpa from his team, barely more than a kid himself, stayed behind to get him down while the rest of the group descended. That decision, made by a brave young man trying to do right by a foolish one, is the part of this story that should never be forgotten, because it is the young Sherpa who paid the price that lasted. Picture the youngest, least senior man on the mountain, staying in the death zone for a stranger who came up here for a video. That is the kind of courage I do not think I will ever fully understand. Through a freezing night, high on the mountain, the young Sherpa stayed with Emerson, sharing oxygen, trying to keep him moving, doing the work the influencer's fitness had failed to do. By the time help reached them in the morning, Emerson was gone, and the Sherpa had paid for those hours with his hands and feet. The frostbite was deep, and in the weeks that followed, the surgeons took several of his fingers and most of his toes. He had gone up a strong, young climber with a whole career ahead of him, and came down unable to ever climb seriously again. The last post on Emerson channel was scheduled, eager, oblivious, a teaser that went out automatically promising his followers the most epic summit video they had ever seen, dropping soon. It posted while he was already dead on the mountain, and the comments filled with excitement underneath it for days before anyone knew. Emerson Puit died on Everest on the 27th of May, 2017, chasing footage on a mountain that performs for no one, and the truest cost of his vanity was not even his own life. It was the hands and feet of a young man who stayed to save him, a Sherpa whose climbing life ended before it started, maimed for a video the dead man would never post. It was the 15th of May, 2022, and high above the South Col, a man who had been an athlete his whole life was sinking into the snow, emptied out by a summit he had reached on pride and old muscle memory, with nothing left for the long way down. The last man had been an athlete his whole life, and he could not let go of what that used to mean. Thaddius Crane was a former college sportsman, once truly elite, the fastest in almost every room he had walked into. And at 41, he still carried himself like the young man he had been. He came to Everest believing that a lifetime of being the fittest person around had earned him a place on the summit, never quite registering that the body he was trusting was the memory of a body, and that the mountain only deals with the one you actually bring. His posts leaned hard on the past, old highlight clips next to new gym videos, captions about how he had been an athlete his whole life, about how age was just a number, and the mountain was about heart. He told his followers he had never been beaten at anything physical, and did not intend to start now. The people cheering him on could not see the difference between a man who is in shape and a man prepared to survive in the death zone, a difference the mountain measures precisely. It was a busy season. The mountain crowded again after the quiet of the pandemic years, and Thaddius climbed into it on pride and old muscle memory. He did better than he had any right to for a while. His athlete's discipline, carrying him up through the camps, and like the others, that early success lied to him. He had spent his life closing the gap to younger, fresher competitors through sheer will, and he tried the same thing here, against a mountain that does not get tired, cannot be outcompeted, and does not care what you used to be. His messages home were proud and a little defensive, the words of a man being asked by his own body a question he did not want to answer. He wrote that he felt 20 years younger, that the young guides were impressed, that he had a few good climbs left in him yet. He did not write about how long the nights were now, or how the recovery that used to come so easily would not come at all up here, in a place where no one recovers, and the body only ever runs down. On summit day, his age and the altitude finally collected what they were owed. He reached the top on the last of everything he had. Hours of effort poured into a body that at sea level could have given more, but up here had nothing in reserve, and on the descent he simply emptied out. It was the most common death on the mountain and the least dramatic, the slow collapse of a climber who has spent every last bit of himself reaching a goal and has nothing left for the far more dangerous journey back down. Most of them go exactly like this, and it is the part I find hardest. Not a great catastrophe, but the quiet arithmetic of a body that spent everything getting up and saved nothing for the way down. He sank down in the snow above the South Col, unable to go on, and this time the mountain did not let everyone walk away. The Sherpa who had stayed with him, a steady, experienced man, refused to leave him quickly and ended up caught out high on the mountain as the cold came on, giving up his own oxygen and his own descent to stay with a client who could not move. Thaddius Crane died there in the snow on the 15th of May, 2022, an old athlete, undone by the gap between the man he was and the man he had been. But this story, alone among the five, has someone who came back. The Sherpa who stayed with him survived that night, though it cost him a hard rescue the next morning and several toes to the cold. For a while it was not clear he would climb again, and many in his place never do, but he healed and trained and went back, and he stands now as the one thread of mercy in all of this, the single man in 5 stories who walked back onto the mountain after it had taken something from him. Thaddius had scheduled a message to go out to his family from the summit, and it sent. It said he had made it, that he loved them, that he had proven you are never too old. It arrived while the people who loved him were already waiting for news that had not yet reached them. The last words of a man who got exactly the summit he wanted, and none of the way home. Truthfully, what stays with me is how alike all 5 were under the muscle and the metals. Every one of them looked at the deadliest mountain on earth and saw a thing their body could beat. They were not lazy men and not cowards, and most were fitter than nearly everyone watching this. That is the hard part. The gym had told them the truth their whole lives, that a strong, disciplined body wins and the fit survive. Everest is the one place that lesson stops being true, where the body you spent years building counts for almost nothing against the single fact that above 26,000 feet, there is not enough air to keep you alive, and no amount of strength or will can make your blood carry oxygen that is not there. 4 of them learned it in their last hours, and the Sherpas who tried to save them paid too. 2 with their careers, and 1 with his toes, and a long road back. The mountain did not hate any of them. It does not hate anyone. It simply asks a question no gym can answer, and the answer it wants is humility, the one thing these men were least likely to bring.